The McCartney alphabet, an A to Z guide to the solo career of Sir Paul McCartney. Hello there, bonjour, and any other languages for hello?
Croeso, Shumai is the Welsh, actually.
It's the Welsh, okay. And welcome to another episode of the McCartney alphabet. I'm David Fgrave.
I'm Clary Sadler.
And you're you. Catchphrase done. And we're here today for a second part, essentially, on the Morgan Neville film Man on the Run. If you happen to hear it already, I did a first thoughts, me on my own, which was weird. But today we're going to focus, we'll let Clary say her bit, really.
Yeah.
How are you anyway? You okay?
I'm very well. I actually managed to watch it in 3 sittings, which is quite remarkable considering I've got 4 kids that are very, very demanding of my time. So
yeah. Is it normally like 5-minute bursts of anything? If you're lucky.
If that, yeah. And also my wife, not a Macca fan.
Unbelievable.
I know the divorce papers have been filed already.
Yeah.
No, I mean, she likes 80s Macca, actually.
Not a bad thing.
Which, not a bad thing, but not really interested in following any, she's listened to a couple of these and was like, oh yeah, great,
Right,
brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to any more there.
Oh, fair enough. Do you mean the podcast or the music?
Actually.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, both.
Yeah, fair enough. That's the weather, yeah. I mean, if you don't like Paul McCartney that much,
yeah, she listens to me waffle a lot.
Yeah, me too. Actually, funny you should mention your wife, because I was looking at just doing the general sort of AI chat GPT thing the other day, just looking at what it says about, a bit like the modern day version of Googling your own name. And it was fairly accurate about us and the McCartney alphabet, but at one point I asked it who my wife is, and it thought I was married to you. So,
That's very funny.
That's what the internet thinks, apparently. So, interesting.
That's a rabbit hole in itself. Have
Yes.
you ever tried using, because unless you change the settings, sorry to go off tangent, but
No.
For example, I just Googled some information regarding, the director and et cetera,
Yeah.
And of course, it instantly brings up now, unless you opt out, AI assist Google.
Right.
But
yeah.
like so many times I've done that, and it's been absolute BS. It's like I was trying to find the song for an episode we did a while back now, where Sean Lennon appeared in his band Chibomato appeared in an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I was trying to find out the name. Yeah, and it said something like, "Oh, that song is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer." The band that features Sean O'Connell. I was like, right, yeah, I must remember to turn that feature off.
Yes. Yeah. It also thought that I was asexual as well. So that's apparently I've been on the record about that, and also it attributed very specific quotes from the podcast that we definitely didn't say. So yeah, don't believe what you read online is the general thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're talking about the episode Man on the Run. Now Clary's seen it, and I've just watched it again. But really, I guess I should start by handing over to you and let me know what you thought, Clary. What did you think?
To be honest, I was expecting, and I think I'd listened to your response to seeing it, because you saw it in the cinema, of course. So
yeah.
Before it hadn't been on Prime at that point, it hadn't come out. So I didn't want to kind of go into it with too many preconceptions, but I was thinking, okay, so they are going to be treading a lot of old ground. How can you not kind of cover that stuff without talking about the Beatles and the breakup and the court case, and how can you say all that stuff in a new way?
Yeah.
And actually, I similar to what you sort of pointed out in your first response was that focus on, I guess, how Linda was his emotional rock, really, and that that sort of, I felt the central kind of framing device of Paul McCartney trying to escape Paul McCartney and that kind of move to the farm, to the
Yeah.
simple life, and that line where he says, I bought a farm, you're probably going to hate it. It was just
Yeah.
not the rich rock star kind of cliche.
Hmm.
And yeah, I thought it was really sweet. I really quite liked the archival footage, how it was used.
Yeah,
I
definitely. Yeah.
like that the sort of the talking head. Well, I mean, it was mostly voiceover, wasn't it? So the modern day takes being almost narrated over these various points.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It didn't feel like a slog, and it didn't feel like, oh, we know this. This
Hmm.
is just repeating Y or Z. Um, and I also liked, and I think you pointed this out, that I mean, obviously with Macca being executive producer and having a hand in it all,
Yeah.
could almost have a rather sanitized version of what might have been or what was a messy situation.
Yeah.
And actually says at one point, well, I just assumed that I was I mean, I don't think he used the word twat, but, words to the effect of, I
Yeah.
must be this difficult bastard,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
and they left stuff in, like the bit where, is it Denny says, in the sound check, well, we're only going to have to bloody do it again when Paul
Yeah.
gets here,
I thought it was funny.
and
Yeah.
them saying, yeah, and them saying things like, why is he trying to make out we haven't got to compete with the Beatles? We
Yeah.
have. He's Paul McCartney. Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
we're not on an even keel. And leaving in the stuff about him basically paying them a pittance. So
Hmm.
all that grounded it in a realism that makes you kind of go, oh, they're not just painting this in I'm Paul McCartney, I'm doing a legacy project and I
Yeah.
want to focus on the wing stuff and look at all this. It did ring as true, kind of warts and all,
Yeah.
which was refreshing, I think.
Definitely. And I think, I mean, and I did write down Beginner's Guide to Macca in the 70s. I mean, it is kind of that,
Yeah.
but it does feel like a film as opposed to a documentary. I thought again, watching it again, like the story really drives along. And so obviously, yeah, there's loads of stuff that has been skipped and left out. But yeah, watching it again today, wondering how honest it was. I did note all those things, like you said, that they are prepared. You can't. There's only so much detail you can put into it, but definitely it doesn't sanitize it too much, like you say, and it does allow space for those sort of comments that suggest that he might not all be all sweetness and light.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember now if you said this in your response episode or if we spoke off mic about it. But it's hard to talk about that time without it being Beatles heavy, because of
Yeah,
course it was all interlinked in his need to escape Paul McCartney and escape the lawsuit and the troubles and
yeah,
all that stuff. And kind of almost reinvent himself, but starting with the basics with McCartney one, and then on Ram obviously as well, and all the flack he got essentially, and the blaming of splitting at the Beatles. It's hard not to talk about that because it's so wrapped up in who he tried to escape from and then reinvent himself as.
yeah,
But I don't think it was done in that this is going to be a Beatles heavy thing to get all the people watching. And, I mean, I imagine there'd be Beatles fans that maybe are less drawn to the Macca solo stuff and the Wing stuff that probably
yeah,
slated it. I read a couple of Rotten Tomato reviews and couldn't be bothered to read anymore. But, it's like,
yeah,
if you're going to have that attitude of, yeah, this is, a poor kind of, well, poor imitation or not even in the same wheelhouse as the Beatles, so therefore it's dismissed as being rubbish or whatever.
yeah.
You're not really going to change that person's opinion.
No, exactly. Also, it's not like he doesn't say that it's a hard task. He does,
Yeah.
he's very much, and like pretty much the first bit of the film is him saying, when I hear somebody slating Paul McCartney or whatever, I kind of agree with them. So he's not. I think it's a good stab at reconvincing a little bit the people who are like that in terms of like the Beatles fans who haven't really, well, like I say, Beginner's Guide of him in the 70s. It's like if you haven't really focused on it, I think you'd at least find a lot to like in it. But yeah, like you say, it's not going to. Yeah, people are very set in. Says people doing an opinion-based podcast, but people are very set in their opinions, and it's hard
Yeah.
to sway them. But yeah,
I do again, we know the story. It's not like a revelation, but just seeing all the archive footage kind of surrounding, how he got Heather first singing, and there's Middle C, and that kind of. But
Yeah,
none of that feels. So many people have slated her, and I know her daughter even said like how those comments and when they isolated the vocals and kind of played it and mocked her,
yeah,
and actually just listening to them singing together and the music choices they used, she was such an essential component to the Wings sound.
really, really was, and
In the
yeah,
same way that Mama Cass was to the mamas, I've had a brain thing, mamas and papas.
yeah, yeah,
um, it's sort of an essential part, really. It sort of it loses a bit of something
yeah.
with that voice stripped away.
Like that really lovely clip at the end of them doing "You Are My Sunshine," the three of them together.
Yeah.
And one, I mean, like the phrasing is really, really tight on it, even though it's a little silly throwaway thing. But yeah,
Mm,
that is quite nice. Obviously, that three were the nucleus of the band. But yeah,
mm.
Linda's such a big part of the vocal sound, and it's a good part of it. It's what makes it what it is. So yeah, I should probably just point out and correct because you said Heather rather than Linda.
Oh my gosh. Sorry.
But I couldn't really let that one go by. But
I was thinking of her
probably the
daughter Heather
daughter. Yeah,
that
yeah, of
that
course.
Paul adopted because I
Yeah.
didn't know that actually. That was
Oh,
some
did you not?
information I didn't
Right. Yeah.
know. No.
Yeah.
So that sorry, slap my wrist. Uh,
Don't know.
but yeah, I kind of like it really you felt what he was doing with forming the new band, and it wasn't just this is what I'm going to do after the Beatles. He wasn't just starting a new band that could rival the success he had there, because as
Yeah.
he admitted, he couldn't do that. He just wanted maybe the idea of that older Paul McCartney,
Mm.
that one that had become a bit of a joke. It was almost like he wanted to outrun that version of himself.
Yeah.
And the Scottish farm, it makes sense that he would go to like furthest part of of the UK
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
just surround himself in. I mean, it looks lovely. I mean,
Yeah. It really does. And it's so fascinating to see the footage of it now that they used because I'm very
mm,
familiar with the photos of the sort of
mhm.
McCartney Ram era of them, playing around with the pets and stuff around the farm. But when you see
Yeah.
it now and it still looks much the same, or when there's shots of Rude's studio that's clearly now that's been set up for it,
Mm,
and there's a bit right at the very end of the film where he's walking along the like fence, top of the fence, like balancing on it, and he jumps, and it sort of says about the sort of new
mm,
step. And then I think it goes from the footage bit now, and then you see that bit, and it brings it all home. And it just, yeah, it's really nice to see all of that as something you've not seen. I don't think the farm has ever been viewed inside the house and stuff beyond the photos around the time. So that was interesting to see. But I mean, it really
mm,
is. There was a nice quote with Morgan Neville, the director, that I saw online where someone was talking to him and asked him what Paul thought of the film. And he said, but the first viewing of it, Morgan Neville was sat behind him in the cinema and with like Stella and Mary and James and stuff, and he watched them all reacting because obviously it's footage of like their pets and their
mm.
family, and it's just said it was
Yeah.
a really lovely thing to see,
Mm,
and because that really comes across in the film, doesn't it? It really is quite moving, I think, as a family
mm.
thing, a family unit, and the idea of what they did when you don't have any time to stop. They just had to go straight into
Yeah.
this thing, and the bravery of Linda and the
Mm,
bravery of the two of them, and all of it. It's just, it
yeah.
really, that's the one thing that I really felt this film brought across that things like Wingspan didn't so much, was just the sense of the family in the centre and how they felt about it. And it felt very,
Mm,
it did manage to feel very personal for someone who's quite
yeah.
famous for redacting, perhaps, even though it was the same
Mm,
stories. But at the same time, it's the same stories because that's what happened. It's no, you
mm.
can't necessarily reinvent the wheel in that sense. And it did feel sort of, they felt vulnerable. The situation they were in felt vulnerable, and like the sense of trying stuff initially, failing, trying stuff, improving. The middle period, Wings Over America and One Hand Clapping, really sort of nailing it and settling, and then the sort of decline out of it. Or so they framed it. I know we don't necessarily think that about Back to the Egg, but
Mm, mm.
yeah. So it did feel really, really personal, which is a hard thing to do when it's such a familiar story, such a familiar person, to make it feel real. There was a nice bit, actually, I listened to The Rest is Entertainment, the podcast, Richard Osman and Marina Hyde, and at the end they recommend each week, what would you recommend? And Richard Osman recommended Man on the Run, and he sort of said, you already like Paul McCartney, but it will make you like him even more, which I thought was a really, really nice thing. And not in the sort of sanitized, vanity project. It's not a vanity project because he didn't direct it, and it can't really be a vanity project if you include Mary Had a Little Lamb and Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance.
The red nose.
Yeah, that's an interesting... and the funny quote, I think it's Nick Lowe, the musician, said, Mary had a little fucking lamb. Are you nuts? Which made me laugh. And also there's a really good quote from Denny towards the end where he says, I think it's about Mull of Kintyre, he says, but knowing Paul, if someone says no, he wants to do it more.
Yeah.
That's the real thing you get about... And there's a quote earlier on where I think it's the author Peter Doggett saying, in the 70s or the early 70s, Macca was uncool. Was seen as uncool. But then there's footage, as you say in that, of Paul and Linda on their horses, and Paul with all the beards. They look fucking cool.
They do.
In a really and that's the thing, at the time it was framed a certain way because of the press stuff, because of him being the one tasked with splitting up the Beatles. And again, when you see the quotes again from the Rolling Stone review of Ram, and it's just fuck off. But it really does, when you actually look at it with the passage of time, what they are doing is really very cool. The risk that they take, the risk they take with as we've said many times, the university tour where they just turn up. All of it, what do you do when you can't take... Most bands now, they release an album, they take 5-10 years in between it and release another one. In the nature of how things worked back then and the way they were doing it, it was basically straight back in immediately, wasn't it? And so to do that in the glare of, the public eye, when you are literally from the biggest band in the world, and to have to take those early steps with new people in front of everyone, you go. And this is again what Richard Osman said in the feedback. He said, he makes mistakes, but you're going to make mistakes. But it's just a lovely story of that. But yeah,
and I think it's apparent, that he wasn't trying to build a new supergroup. He really deliberately wanted something that was scrappy and raw, and that they could kind of evolve and develop together. And talk about escaping that Beatles level of stardom where you can't play live anymore because you can't hear yourself through through the monitors or whatever. And then just turning up at a university. I mean, I think it's chasing normality. But if you can while in a rock band, but you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What else was he going to do, He was a songwriter. That's all he'd know. So he chased the most normal guy version of that. And it was as much, rather than an eccentric, thinking about the before Wing stuff like Ram and McCartney as a solo project. It feels less like an eccentric, bizarre sort of side project thing to do and more like a therapy endeavor, and it works because as Sean O'Leno said, it was a masterpiece. Ram especially
definitely. And then when you see the footage and hear, there's a point where Jeff Britton in that stage of the thing when they're doing the one hand clapping thing, and he says something about it's the ballsiest thing he's ever recorded. That bit does sound, when he's doing Soily, does sound great. And then also when you see, I tell you, it's a really good reframing again of the song "Silly Love Songs" to underline how good a song that is. Because I mean, obviously, it's quite moving and quite emotional at the beginning when you've got the demo playing over the Ida and stuff. But then when you get to the bit where you see them playing that on Wings Over America, and again, we know this, but with the brass and everything, it sounds just great. Just the energy and the positivity of it. So it just. You can see that in basically next to no time, having started again in the public eye, but with Linda, who wasn't a musician, and trying to make it as honest and earthy and as genuine as they could, they very quickly got to the point where they were nailing it in a live sense. They felt like a settled band. It's a good, and the choice of the music and everything, it really does underline that Wings were actually good, which is the thing that gets really lost a lot of the way. You know? They really, really were good, you know.
Yeah.
And there's even like, and probably for you, I imagine you felt the same thing. There's a bit where he's talking about there's the Last Wings gig, the Kampuchea charity thing, and you get a little bit of Arrow Through Me
Oh,
live,
yeah. Yes.
but actually
Yeah.
live, and it's like it still sounds great. It's so good to see that stuff, you know. And
Yeah.
he's obviously got a soft spot for that song because he does reference it more now. But yeah, you just like, and
Yeah.
I suppose that's the thing. Again, and again, reading some of the feedback people have said, you know, people are like, oh, we would like to see more of that footage from that gig. We'd like to see the footage from, you know, various other, the rehearsals and stuff, the ICA bit at the beginning when they're rehearsing. But it's like, I don't think this film is the place for it. I think the point is that this
No.
film is the sort of trying to tell a story, trying to tell the story of him in the 70s in a way that's concise and has, you know, and has a sort of that, you know, that keeps you interested as a person who doesn't necessarily know all of this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And for people like us, it's still lovely to see and to see the footage and to feel the sense of the story, you know, the heart of it. But you're not going to get the really like in depth, you know, the bits of footage and stuff that you would really like to see in that, because it wouldn't, it's not the right place for it.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, in your response, you know, just how lovely and how kind of almost like warm and fuzzy you kind of felt seeing the dynamic between Paul and Linda and how everyone spoke about her, and you know, and
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, her daughter saying how cool she was, you know, and
Yeah.
then you saw all the outfits, and it just sort of, I don't know about reframing her, but almost her presence when you think back to the criticisms that Yoko got back in the day, and Linda as well.
Yeah.
Almost like the women coming along and
Yeah. Yeah.
throwing that, oh, for God's sake. But she was his anchor, and there's something really quite moving about seeing or hearing an 80, what is he,
83,
83?
84. Yeah.
80, yeah, 84-year-old still grieving, you know, so
Yeah. Yeah. Because
hugely, you know, it's just her, the partnership and the family aspect, and I don't know, it was really moving. And you
yeah. In the cinema, I was close to tears on multiple occasions. So many little moments. You know, it is an emotional thing because I don't think she was just the anchor for him. She was the anchor for that entire family, wasn't she?
yes, yeah,
And the story has a sadness because she's not there. But it really, yeah, it's really, really lovely. It is like that sort of looking through their scrapbook. Also, I tell you what I really liked was you can tell it's been directed by someone who gets music, who understands music. Because, you know, like when you watch a lot of documentaries or films and you clock the bit where they've used a bit of footage that isn't in time with it, or, you know, they're fretting
yeah,
a different note.
yeah,
Little things like there's a lovely little shot where you hear Maybe I'm Amazed, and then you hear the run up, the
yeah,
and they filmed it on the inside of a piano now, and it's right, you know.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
like the bit at the beginning when they're doing the whole sequence over the end. You know, all of that is
yes,
edited
yeah,
really well to that. It's been directed by someone who understands that and is a fan as well. So it just, yeah, all that ties together in such a lovely way and makes it feel very, very real. And I mean, what do you do when like your life, your family life, all those things, because it's in the spotlight, it's part of popular culture. It's things people know. It's things that people are part of. But it's still him and his family. It's still, you know, he just got married a couple of years before to Linda. They just had, you know, she had her child Heather, and they just had Mary, and then they had Stella, and then they had James. And all the, you know, the thing about bringing the women into the band, it's very notable that both John and Paul did the same thing. They both built their family, and what they were doing was built around their partnership with their wife, you know. So, but it's just where John went one way at that point, and a lot more very serious in many ways. Paul went the other way, and Paul just, you know, went more internalized with his family in a weird way. And also, like, I mean, this is the sort of thing people say all the time, but things like McCartney or things like Ram, when you listen to them now, it's not an outlandish thing. Like you said, you know, it makes a lot more sense now
yeah,
as a project. And I get that when you've just heard Abbey Road and you've just heard Let It Be, and all of that is such a big
Yeah.
statement, to then go right down to the very basics of what you hear on McCartney is such a jarring thing. But in many ways, he just goes, "Well, sod it, I'm going to do this." You just have to accept
Yeah.
it. And the best bits of that album, things like That Would Be Something, for example, it's great. It's just great. And there's still the big statement song, Maybe I'm Amazed or whatever. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's nice to see that Ram is very much reframed. I now believe that Paul McCartney believes that it was a good album and that it wasn't, but which for many years it wasn't perceived that way. And what Sean says is lovely and all those things, but it just really does. Yeah, it just underlines all that stuff. And seeing, as I say, all the pets and stuff and all those lovely little moments and like the little bit where they talk about the lovely Linda and you see the footage of opening the kitchen door because that's the door you hear on it. And it just, it's the things that makes you go, oh no, this is actually somebody's family. It's not just this view that we see, of Paul McCartney, the celebrity or whatever. It's genuine, and that was such a lovely thing to see, I thought.
And it feels like you said, it feels like a movie, like you're watching these events unfold in real time. Do you know what I mean?
Really hard thing to do in a talking head like archive footage film.
Yeah.
That was the thing I felt watching it again today, because that was my first feeling when I watched it the first time. But seeing it again today, it really does do that. It's not boring.
No.
And a lot of that is the really clever use of, like I said, the sort of Ram artwork of like little bits of paper, scraps of paper unfolding, showing the pictures you've seen or whatever, and it tying it in really nicely with the rhythm of the music. And funny little, like, for example, so there's a bit where they're talking about the Japanese bust, and there's the bit where you hear Mary say, I can remember my parents looking at each other and going, who's going to take this bit? Because the other one's got to take the kids. And then Paul McCartney says, oops. And there's a little bit of, like, it's the old footage of him, with the beard and stuff in the farm, sticking his tongue out like,
Yeah.
And it just, that's what I mean. Everything is really put in the right place to illustrate that. And so you do feel, even though it's footage you've seen before, we are seeing that little moment of them going, right, what do we do now? So yeah, even though there's stories, it does sort of reground them in reality, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like, there's just a bunch of historians or whatever explaining Wings and
like a classic rock album documentary.
Yeah. It's more like Paul is remembering that period, but you're almost seeing snippets from his mind. But there just so happens to be all that footage exists. It's just like you said, because everything was so in the public eye.
Yeah. And then there was a photographer. So
yeah.
I was surprised by how much the kids remembered. Like there's also, I think it's Mary and not Stella, so it makes sense because she's slightly older. But her saying she remembered when Paul took the phone call about John's death.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean. It's those things again, even though we know it's coming, that moment, and she says about, and reacted in a way that something big had happened. Then he just walked out into the garden, and then and it's married with the footage of obviously all the people with candles and stuff outside the Dakota. It's one of those things again that just, it hits you in the heart again, because you go, how do you deal with that? And John was murdered, and it's just it's because John is, which is something I read in some of the feedback, John is very present, I think, in the film, the most out of obviously the ex-Beatles, in terms of, the relationship. And it's nice to hear, even though it's footage you've seen before, but like John saying, like, if I can't have an argument with my best friend,
I know. Yeah, I noticed that bit. And just the stuff of them, I'm skipping ahead now, but them meeting up for dinner and saying the Saturday, was it Saturday Night Live or something?
Yeah, it was.
Should we just turn up? Shall we just turn up? And getting really excited about it, and then kind of going, why?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is...
it says something like, it'll be good for them, but will it be good for us? And,
and that's sort of, again, paints it as a real friendship and a real relationship with history and baggage, and of course, friends fall out, brothers fall out.
Exactly. And when you go into a thing that is a business arrangement that was never intended to be a business arrangement, but then it becomes that, they've not like prepared. They didn't like all sign contracts at the beginning that said, well, if this happens, this and blah blah blah. Within the interpersonally, and then it all flares up in the worst possible way, and then you've got to recover from that. So yeah, and even like, and again, it's a story that I find quite affecting anyway, but the way it was told in the film again, when it talked about, you know, when they were having an argument or whatever, and John would take his glasses off and say, you know, it's only me. But the way it did that with the footage of him with the glasses and then a photo of him like smiling a hard day's life, you know, it really does. Again, we're just seeing photos, but the way it's done, you do feel like you are close to them in the midst of their relationship, you know. And I think it's really nice to underline and remind you that these are human beings reacting in a messy way to a messy situation.
Yeah, and that I suppose follows on then with the director's choice, but obviously I guess Paul would have had a say in it to include the footage of him essentially being hounded after a day in the studio or whatever, finding out, you know, a few days later, or was that morning actually, wasn't it, about John's murder?
It was the evening of it, yeah.
And then being just kind of hounded, really, and not allowed to grieve or not allowed to process, and then the choice of, you know, that
drag, isn't it?
Yeah, drag, isn't it? You know, the I like the fact, not like, but I think it's one of the sort of complex, emotionally complex parts of the documentary, I think, because it was a very real moment. You know, it was a very real moment, and people have often criticized it, but I think the film kind of contextualizes it and does an effective job of contextualizing it as just shock.
Absolutely.
What the hell do you say?
And also, and because it's like, obviously you hear the voiceover of Sean talking. And I thought the brave bit was he talks over that and says, I can see what he was going through. I can see, you know, but it was brave to the bit that you did hear was Paul saying drag, isn't it? Which is the bit that's comes across the hardest. I tell you what that relates to, like for me, there was a picture I saw the other day of Paul was over in Paris at Stella McCartney's fashion show with Nancy wearing a Wings t-shirt. I thought it was nice to see that his wife now wearing a Wings t-shirt, which again, that show, I mean, what a grown-up thing that is, because that's his ex-wife on your t-shirt. Yeah. That's like, you know, that's amazing. But yeah, there's someone posted a picture of Paul and Nancy there, and Paul looks a bit sort of dazed in the picture, and they're like, oh, you know, and the comments are like, oh, doesn't he look old? And he's probably not well, and and it's just like you're just reading into a moment, you know, a snapshot, and in that it's a drag moment. Paul has been hounded. His best friend has been shot, and it might just be like a way of saying, just fuck off, I don't want to talk about it, you know, because he's saying you don't get, drag, isn't it, you don't get the emotional impact of this, I do, but you're expecting me to say something, you know, and it's so, people read so much into it. Of course he fucking cared, of course he was absolutely like shell-shocked and heartbroken, because even if they weren't at their best like relationship at that point, if you're, you know, that person was such a key person in his life, you know, his best friend, his collaborator was murdered. Of course you would go, or had died, just died, you know, would be, you know, it's so, he wasn't trying to be glib. He was just not really wanting to talk about it. But it, like you say, it does really contextualize it. And to have, of all people, you know, John's son saying, you know, if he understands it, what's happening, then I think we all should be grown up enough to understand it too. You know. Yeah,
and I think, you know, and he speaks, doesn't he, about, I'm so glad we had the opportunity to make up, and we had dinner, you know, not long before, and it's you know, I think he looks in that clip very pissed off and almost that out of body experience. He's not, but he shouldn't have to, you know, I don't know, it's so annoying. Imagine
I know.
At your darkest time, you know, losing someone. And a reporter is just there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible, isn't it? Of course he's going to say, oh, yes, it's a drag. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a real drag.
Yeah.
What the hell do you mean? What a stupid question, you know? It's
and add into it that every moment of his life, his adult life, for however long, this is what he gets. You know, cameras in his face. Like the bit, there's the nice sequence where they talk about, you know, the Beatles question always coming up, and then the bit where Paul like goes at the camera, you know, or there's another bit when he's talking to Tim Rice and he says, and the other question I always get is if. I know, you know, he's like, which is interesting. You know, it's just a funny like insight into this person that, you know, who has endless patience with these banal questions throughout his
Yeah.
life. And then someone's asking him something like that. I remember when George died and the footage of Paul getting out of his Land Rover and then talking about how he felt about that and saying it was his little brother, you could tell part of his thinking was, I need to get this right because of last time. And it's like, why does he have to do that? It's just, I know they knew that George was going to die. He was very unwell. Why do you have to? He doesn't have to find the words for us as the fan base to cope with it. It's much harder for them. So how about just give them a bit of space,
Yeah.
And he does look absolutely shell-shocked in that moment. He really, really does.
Yeah, that's a good phrase for it, shell-shocked.
Yeah.
And, well, the other main note, it's not really a note, we've kind of mentioned it already, but the whole framing of Paul really wanting equality within Wings, want them to feel that dynamic was equal and there wasn't an imbalance. But, of course there was. And I think his point was quite telling that, well, my sort of, I wanted to challenge them then, basically like, well, write something then, give me something good.
Exactly, yeah.
He's one of the greatest songwriters ever.
I know.
And he's wanting a certain quality and expected quality, and he wanted them to kind of, and other members did have opportunities at points. And
he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't, wasn't he? Because you get something like Wings at the Speed of Sound where everyone has a song, and that was derided, and then you have the times when it's mostly him and it's not. You just can't win really. And I always like that moment was like a little attitude moment. I like occasionally when you see a little bit of the fire, again, it's a clip that's well known, but when someone's saying, you're 33 and you're doing a rock and roll tour, isn't that a bit past of it? Yeah, it's pretty old. And he's like, well, I tell you what, why don't you come and watch, see me do what you do and then tell me if I'm past it. And it's just like, I like seeing that little bit of, like Sean says about him and John, he says they both were, like I can't remember the word he uses, but like strong personalities or whatever. But Paul just does it in a slightly more gentler way. But they clearly had that same characteristic in their personalities. They wouldn't have. You see it when you see Paul in like the sort of late '60s footage of him, during the sort of Pepper time, Magical Mystery Tour time, etc. That's a man who is absolutely certain with what he's doing. Do you know what I mean? He knows he's good at that time, and it's nice to, what you get from the film is that he's also vulnerable, but he also has the drive and had the confidence and the experience to know that he was good at what he did, and to sort of, now when you look at it, it's, as we would have said many, many times, it's so ridiculous to hear a 33-year-old having to justify whether they're past it or not. But it really, what I like is that you really see with Paul, it's like he and they were ahead of the curve, because you can see in their eyes, no, that's a ridiculous question. But at that time, rock and roll stars had always been, because it was the first time this had happened, this whole, going from Elvis in the 50s through to now, that they were still, this was the first time that you had this sort of thing of a band, coming, you know what I mean? Like the sort of second chapter, shall we say. But he was only 33, for God's sake, and he's still doing it now at 84, And I also like, although it was in the Wingspan thing as well, the bit about the two marijuana plants, had the seeds in the post. And
and they're trying to stifle that grin.
Yeah, Linda particularly, just smiling to herself. Yeah, and 5 of them came up illegal. It's just, and then you hear the clip of,
imagine that.
I know, and then you hear the clip after that from the journalist, and he says, and Paul said, it said about the judge, he's a great guy. And so I love that there's like, that's the PR Paul, but it is also funny, it's just, but you do see the little sort of troublemaker stuff in them, I like that really good bit where Paul's talking about when, again, the Wings of America bit, and someone is saying, surely, you don't need to do this, you're rich and etc. And he said, he tells the story about the blues musician he met. He said, when he's going back on the road, and he said, if I was Paul McCartney, I'd buy the road. I like that he just sort of, he's aware of how he's perceived. He is both one of the most coolest people on the planet at that time, despite what they're saying, and the most incredible songwriter, but also he's a human being and he's prepared to give time to people and he's patient and the rest of it. And I like seeing all of that, and it's very interesting to see the sort of more I do really feel they bring out the vulnerability of the situation a lot more in that film than you normally get. Was there anything you didn't like? What were you less satisfied by, maybe?
I mean, possibly because you mentioned it in your recording, it was in my head. The missing albums, shall we say, or I mean, not really missing. Obviously, they showed a bit of London Town, the photo shoot.
Yeah.
But you kind of think, oh my gosh, there's so many songs on that album that just, I think, just shows their diversity.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you've got silly little love songs and someone's knocking at the door, you expect to hear that, and that's great. But wouldn't it have been love? I mean, we did get the backs of the egg moment with Arrow Through Me, which was lovely because I bet a lot of people, especially if they're more kind of Beatles knowledge, would be surprised to hear that. Yeah, definitely.
It was annoying that they did those serve to underline, because watching it again today reminded me the sort of press quote of someone saying, "Oh, Back to the Egg." There's like something like there's how many thousand copies unsold still in the warehouse. Bear in mind that back in those days, to sell a number one album, like a number one single, you'd be selling in the millions rather than the tens of thousands or whatever it might be. But it's a shame that the narrative of the film, and I get why, because it's trying to get to the not wanting to do it anymore, but the narrative of the film does serve to underline this negative view about specifically Back to the Egg, which is frustrating because I think it's a great album, as I know you do.
Yeah, definitely.
It's spiky, it's the spikiest and sort of edgiest, I would say, of the Wings albums, and London Town, as you say. Other than you do get a little clip of him recording Morse Moose and the Great Goose, the vocal.
Yes.
But again, to serve to underline the sort of frustration or whatever. But you don't you don't hear. And okay, you're not going to. You don't hear I'm Carrying. You don't hear London Town. You don't hear, with a little luck, you hear them rehearsing it, which is great. I suppose the narrative has to have that, doesn't it? It has to have the rise and fall.
Yeah.
But it's a shame.
This is where it all went.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's like, really? You're going to use that track to highlight that Back to the Egg was a
I
flop?
know.
Really?
Yeah. And a live clip that sounds quite good. I don't really understand what you're saying here. I know. It's, anything else?
I don't think so. I suppose they didn't really, but then it wasn't about that, was it? Kind of, we were looking at a specific era of Macca and Wings.
Yeah.
So they're not going to talk about, later day and when Linda got ill. It was kind of looming there as though we all know what happened. And I quite like that it focused on that period and the sort of the bond and the affection and it obviously has shaped who he went on to become as a solo artist after Wings. That wasn't the point of it, so no, that wouldn't be a negative thing. You kind of want a part two. Or not even a part two. I'd like them to do something similar for the latter day stuff, or the 80s 90s, whatever,
or a documentary about specific albums, because then at least you can you've got a bit more time to give that. I thought it really nicely, and I noted it again watching it again. It obviously starts, and early on in the film you've got the press release that he gave out for McCartney, the little false interview, and it ends with what are your plans now, and his plan, he says, my only plan is to grow up. And then at the end of the film, when you've got the sort of the McCartney 2 stuff, and we're going out, but he says, well, what a good aim to grow up. So it really ties it. And then also you hear Sean saying, I think the moment that he did grow up was when my dad passed away, and that sort of, it suggests enough, and it knows that that Linda died. It knows that but all of that stuff is far away enough into the future that it doesn't need to, obviously it doesn't reference it. But also you hear the kids say, we would now sort of realise those were probably the best days of our life, and it really does do all that. It's I mean, it's a shame the things that are missed musically and stuff. But then the thing is, when you have someone so prolific and so much happening,
how can you?
You can't, can you? Not in a 2-hour thing, One of my sort of complaints is more about. So I listened to it today actually, the soundtrack album. And it's a bit random that the Man on the Run soundtrack album, like last year, there was the Wings sort of retrospective thing that they released because they had a book out as well. And then they do it again with this. And when you listen to the soundtrack album, it is in chronological order of the film. So like today I listened to it and it's basically in chronological order of his career. And then at the end it had Let Me Roll It at the end. I thought, oh, was that at the end? And then it's because that's in the end credits in the film. But the thing that confused me, so the extra tracks on it that haven't been released, the main one is Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance. But the audio is basically been pulled off the television tape. So so it doesn't sound, they obviously haven't gone to the master tape of, because obviously Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance, it's mimed, the main part of the sequence. The first bit on the piano, you can tell is actually live, he's doing it live. But the version they've released on the album essentially sounds mono. It doesn't. They haven't remixed it. They haven't gone to the master tape. They've just used audio off the footage. And I saw someone saying on YouTube, which I didn't cross-reference, but I know that I think it was when they did the archive collection of probably Red Rose Speedway. On that and the extras on the sort of package, you had the James Paul McCartney special, and they said the audio on that was better than the audio that had been released on this album. So they finally they use it as a reason to release that, but they don't even use the same technology used on, say, Now and Then to give it life. So it's just like, oh, okay. So the official release version of that song that's never actually been released is just the audio pulled off the television special. Why is that? It's just a bit weird.
Weird.
And funny enough, my reevaluation of that particular song is, when you watch it and you see the footage and you hear the sound of the production, that is so 1970s TV special, Morecambe and Wise, Two Ronnies. And maybe possibly they did do the audio as a live recording in the television studio, and then and it could have been the in-house band. I don't know, but when you put it in context, I mean, the thing you do go is you go, okay, well, John Lennon would never have done that. John Lennon would have never done the sort of family favourites, 1970s TV special. But it does sound like that. And then I also thought earlier on today, well, because Magical Mystery Tour was so slated, because it was released on Boxing Day, it was shown on Boxing Day, and everyone didn't get the sort of arty, trippy thing of it because they were expecting, as Paul said, Bruce Forsyth or something. I think in a way, the James Paul McCartney thing was trying to do the more family. Do you know what I mean? 70s.
Yeah,
there's so much, if you see any of those documentaries, sorry, not documentaries, the specials of that time.
The specials,
They have that feel, don't they? And I think he was tasked with, I'll write a song that tries to do that tap dancey thing. And again, it's good.
It works.
It's good. It works for what it is. But it's weird. I mean, the outfit is weird. The fake tash is weird. But it was a shame that I went, the one thing I might have done is, if I didn't download the album, I might have downloaded that song. But there's not really much point, because it's not a good quality version. So why do that? I don't really know why. Because he must have the master tapes. Why? Yeah. So that was the thing that confused me. The soundtrack album makes sense, but I do find it a bit confusing that, like I say, last year they released a 2-album greatest hits again of the Wings stuff, knowing this was coming down the track, because. The documentary was premiered for the first time last year in a festival, the Telluride Film Festival. So you just go, this doesn't feel quite joined up. Couldn't you have just released that retrospective you were going to do now in the context of the film? Yeah. And have it married together that way, rather than do it last year and then sort of do it again. And as I say, the only thing that makes sense to me today is you go, no, it's a bit like one of those old film soundtrack albums. If you got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film soundtrack for some reason, or you want the Back to the Future 2 one because it's got Back in Time or whatever it is. It does that, but it's just a bit. I guess the point is they're a bit like this film, a bit like even that Wings album last year. I think the thing we have to remember is what they're trying to do is repackage these things for a new audience, not for the fans. It's for the people who have a passing interest, because like I say, the Wingspan thing, you go, well, it was covered in that, but that was like 20 years ago. So if you're trying to constantly repackage for a modern market, I suppose that's the reason why these things happen. And also, if he was trying to do a sort of vanity project, and I guess there was an aspect of that, I don't know if he commissioned the film or whether Morgan Neville led it or which way it was. But on the back of Get Back, it makes perfect sense to go, okay, well, what followed that? How can we make it, how can we latch on to that thing? Because I do think as I said, I think that he and Wings deserve a reevaluation.
Definitely.
And Wings specifically deserve it. Because the underlining thing, whether it be as good as the Beatles or not, when you hear the soundtrack choices in the film, when you hear the Wings Over America bit, Wings were good. Wings were good. I know it's a controversial statement, maybe not on a Paul McCartney podcast, but you know, I would even argue they were Ebenezer good. Niche reference, but it just, and like I say, that little clip of them doing "You Are My Sunshine," they're just doing it for like a home video.
It really hits home the fact that they were like a family unit rather than just a band, you know. And it's like, okay, we're not in the band anymore, but we're still friends, you know.
I mean, I suppose the people who know a bit more go, well, there was a bit of a situation where Denny sold some stories to a newspaper, and there was a period when they weren't really friends. But partly, I think that was to do with finances. But ultimately, it's a bit like the stuff with John. Again, the sort of breakup might be messy, but it is really nice, isn't it? That quote I think you were sort of heading towards there, where Denny says, you know, okay, you know, it wasn't over. It's never over. We may never have released another album or whatever, but it's like that idea of like time isn't linear, you know, and to see that and see the footage of them singing together, you go, yeah, exactly. They were a family. They did that effortlessly. They're just mucking around, but it sounds great because that was Wings, really, wasn't it? That was the sort of the heart of it, the nucleus. There were great musicians around it, but that was the thing that remained throughout, obviously. The other thing I noticed as well, I saw some feedback because I follow the Jimmy McCulloch Facebook fan page. I think he was the only person where you didn't get a direct voiceover with. Everyone else, right down to like even the Back to the Egg era band, you know, they all got a couple of moments of audio. Jimmy is present and you see him, but you don't. Yeah, it's quite a notable person to be missing, and I don't know if that's just because the way the storyline fell, or also because obviously there's some controversy of the Jimmy thing. But yeah, that was just a thing that noticed that he's the only voice. Even like Jeff Britton, the drummer who was only there for Junior's Farm and One Hand Clapping, he gets a moment. You know, it's not. And also in the cinema, what they did, which you didn't get to see, was there was a little bit at the end with the director Morgan Neville and Paul in a little room together with a piano, with some of the 70s clothes. There's a bit where Paul put on one of the jackets again, which he could basically still squeeze into, which is quite impressive. You know, and he's like joking as he tries to up the buttons, but it's like, this is an 84-year-old man putting on a jacket that he wore when he was 30 and still be able to fit into it. But and also they had, I forget the name of the robot, you know, the weird robot thing you saw on stage that came on. They had that there, and they had Paul with a remote control, like operating it and stuff. and the weird thing was, which again, when you've had so much in your life, Morgan Neville said, "Do you remember that?" And he went, "No, I don't remember this at all." Which is, you know, that was interesting to see, and it was nice to see. But so I guess we like it. I think, like a bit like you said, I went in not expecting much. You know, expecting there to be lots of like frustrations or whatever, or go, it's covering the same ground. But actually, it was very affecting and very emotional and told the story in a nice way. And the music sounds good. So if you know what it's for, I forgave all of that. I just went, it's, you know, it's a story we know, but it's told in a nice way. And
and I think it does make you see that period, you know, in a slightly different light.
Yeah,
you know, I think so, which I guess was the aim.
Yeah, but not with that, not trying to like ram it down your throat, no pun intended with ram, but like it does it in a way where you make that own judgment yourself from how it unfolds, don't you? And like I say, so when you get to that middle period where they're doing the massive tour and the nice bits of footage where he says, you know, here I am doing it second time round, and it cuts briefly to the shot of the Beatles all inside the car, you know, in 64 on that first visit. Because it's no time at all. That's the mad thing, you know. It's like 1975. It's like 11 years max from the time he did it the first time round. And you can see how comfortable like there's a bit again where you hear someone saying After that first one, he like knew. He said, look, he knows he can do this. And having gone from feeling like he couldn't to feeling like he could is in again like 2 years or something. is extraordinary. And I guess also it reveals that there is a lot of footage out there of them recording on the yacht in London town. There is footage of this other. Let's at some point see it on something. Let's get the the Back to the Egg London Town archive collections with all that stuff on, rather than go, okay, he gets that Arrow Through Me was a good song now that he'd forgotten, but what he doesn't realise is there's a lot of other good stuff.
Loads, yeah.
Yeah, but so it's worth a watch as a McCartney
Definitely.
fan, as a new person to it. It's worth a watch because it makes it real again. It makes it human again, doesn't it? I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely. And even my mother, who loves Macca, but she says I love Macca, and she's really meaning the Beatles and some of the bigger hits, And I told her about it, and she read the summary, and it's in her planner. So even she's gonna
that's progress.
Yes, yeah,
that's a good thing. And that's the thing. For the people who know the Beatles bit, but know a bit of the Wings stuff, it does. And because it just focuses on Wings, so at least it does cover that whole band's story. But it does serve to underline that, like you said, Let 'Em In is an obvious choice, but it's a great song. Listen to What the Man Said is a great song. Band on the Run is great. We know that, but it's still all those silly love songs is a great song. If you stop looking for it to be something else, and just take it for what it is, it's great.
Yeah.
That's what this whole podcast has been about, really, isn't
it? Yeah.
Trying to say that. Well, yeah. We did have a comment. Where's my phone? Because we always ask for feedback. Ziggy Boneman, I don't think that's his real name. I say he, I don't know. There's a picture of Kenneth Williams, so I don't think that's his real face either. But he said, when after putting out the My First Thoughts, said, I'm looking forward to the review with Clary. My take, although much of it is known to fans, it is all assembled with a very interesting emphasis. My takeaway was of someone who, despite his genius and success, is quite vulnerable. It's not really a story of pop triumph. It's a personal success story of surviving and thriving when faced with adversity. My partner preferred the HBO Billy Joel documentary. Man on the Run is very McCartney, all over the place. The time spent on Gotta Sing was horribly misjudged. I agree with that to a degree. But if you're a fan, you know that is McCartney. He does as he will. The most commercial of all the Beatles, bollocks is he. So I would agree with that, really, wouldn't you?
Yes,
we could have
definitely
saved our time and just released that message. And and then, like I say, even though I don't like Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance very much, I would have liked to have heard a better quality version of it.
Yes.
I haven't really framed Mary Had a Little Lamb, though. I do think that's quite a bad single.
Mm-hmm.
As a single, that's what right at that point, when you're if I ever listen, if I go, the few times, it's a bit like when you listen to an album you're not quite sure if you like anymore, or you think you don't like, and sometimes you listen to it again and you go, oh no, actually I like it. But if I ever try to listen to Mary Had a Little Lamb, I find it very hard to get to the end of it, being that it's a 3-minute song. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say. Sorry, I didn't let you. Sorry, I presume you agree with the Mary Had a Little Lamb.
I do agree. I was going to say, if you need to sort of rework a children's nursery rhyme or children's kind of song, old classic, do You Are My Sunshine.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounded great. I wouldn't mind hearing that on
exactly.
on a Wings album.
And Don't Wear a Red Nose. And what was the thing? There was just a little moment I noticed, which I thought was of note. There's a bit where you see Linda holding like a magazine, and there's like a Hollywood picture of like a guy and a woman like about to kiss or whatever. And she jokingly says, "The way I never was, the way I never will be," holding this up. But I just noticed as I watched it again, it looked really like the composition of the picture for the press to play cover.
Yes, I did think
did you
that.
Notice that? Yeah. And you just go, I don't know if that is a reference. Is that there for us to, maybe it is, but it was.
I don't know. Yeah.
And I know that they did use, I forget who the photographer was, but a genuine 1930s or 40s, whatever it is, photo artist to take that picture. But yeah, there was just a sort of irony that you go, well, no, but you did.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yeah. And also your daughter, who's a hugely successful fashion designer, based so much, she feels, on what you did.
Yeah,
and it shows. But yeah, so that is our thoughts on Man on the Run, I would say.
Yeah. And it'd be good to hear, in addition to
Yes.
Ziggy's, was it?
Ziggy Bowman, yeah.
Yes.
Best said
it
to the
would
tune of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Ziggy Bowman, Ziggy Bowman.
No, it'd be good to hear your thoughts, everyone's thoughts as well. Where can they do that, David?
They can do it by visiting our socials that I honestly have remembered at the top of my head. I haven't got them written down here. On X and on Facebook and on Instagram and Threads. You can find us by typing in the handle McCartney ABC. You can email us at paulmccartneyabc@gmail.com. Please do email us, because I think if we don't receive an email within 12 months, they'll close it down. And also, if you liked it, like and subscribe on places like Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Let's see what you think. Unless it's a bad one, then do it in your own time at home. Don't write it on a piece of paper and throw it away.
Yeah.
And we'll be back soon, won't we, with more episodes, more letter episodes. We've got a Linda episode planned because we're getting close to Elle. And some other bits and bobs. Oh, tell us what you'd like to hear us talk about as well, because we do enjoy the extras, don't we?
Mm-hmm. We do indeed.
I still think my favourite we did was our 3-part on Give My Regards to Broad Street. That was fun.
I know. Who would have thought going into that would have been?
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. What I thought my opinion of that whole period was didn't end up being quite so.
No.
So yeah.
And also, I just enjoyed
nice.
the third part when we were just talking about the randomness of the film, which was nice. But
yeah.
But anyway, so I guess we'll leave you to your own time. So from now, it's good night from me.
And good night from me.
And probably we should play it with Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance there, because that basically is the two Ronnies. We'll see you again. We'll see you again next time. Thank you for listening.
The McCartney McAlphabet is written and edited by David F. Gray and Clarice Sadler, and is inspired by and features selections from the music of Paul McCartney.